Hi, I'm Bobby Halton, Editor-in-Chief of Fire Engineering Magazine, and welcome to today's Google Hangout on fire engineering. If you were able to join us yesterday, we had Angela Hughes and Beth Murphy and John Murphy. We talked about sexual assault in the fire service. It is archived, so if you're watching today, please take a look at that. We have a hangout scheduled for Monday with our good friend Bill Guston, and several of Bill's friends will be talking about hose line operations. And then we'll have our regularly scheduled Wednesday Humpday Hangout next Wednesday. So we hope you're enjoying these. It's kind of interesting to be talking to you, and we appreciate the fact that so many of you are tuning in and sharing your time with us. You can send a question anytime during today's Hangout by using the hashtag FEtalk. I believe that's correct, right, Brendan? FEtalk? And that'll get questions to us so that we can bring them up on the Hangout as you have questions for our guests today. We've got a great group with us today, four of my good friends, and one guy I work with every day, two guys I work with every day, so it's kind of exciting for me to be able to hang out with them today on the air and just have a conversation that's outside of producing the magazines and the websites and all that we do, and talk about the fire service in general. But joining, and I'm not going to read the bios. We decided before we went on, rather than just read our bios, we would just introduce ourselves. I'm retired fire chief. Started in the fire service back in the early 70s. Had a great career, a structural career primarily. Did a little wildland stuff in my early days. But now I'm working for Penwell Corporation, where I work with the Fire Engineering Magazine primarily, but also with Fire Rescue Magazine with my good friend Erich Roden. And I'm responsible for the education stuff at FDIC. So kind of a neat post-career deal. That's what I do. And now I'll let my good buddy Erich Roden introduce himself. Erich, why don't you tell folks who you are and what you're doing?
Hi, welcome everybody. A great hangout, what we have in store for you guys today. Again, my name is Erich Roden. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Fire Rescue Magazine and Firefighter Nation. I'm also a battalion chief with the City of Milwaukee Fire Department, assigned to the 4th Battalion. Also do a lot of editing at Fire Engineering and some of the other products in the Penwell stable, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing from our guests today. So we have a great lineup, a lot of interesting topics, a lot of heavy topics we'll get into. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Bill Carey, our online editor at Firefighter Nation.
So I'm Bill Carey. I work, the short version is that I work for Penwell Corporation. I help with the team in San Diego, manage the news content for both Fire Rescue Magazine, firefighterNation.com, GEMS, and lawofficer.com, and our related social media sites and member sites, the Connect sites.
And you're also a firefighter, Bill, right?
It used to be for a few years down in Prince George's County here, for a generation of firefighters.
There you go. There you go. Now, our two other guests we have with us. Why don't we start with Chris Naum? Chris, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell folks where you worked and what you're working on now.
Thanks, Bobby. Hey, everybody. This is Chris Naum. I'm a 39-year fire service veteran. I've been involved in both the industrial and municipal side of the fire service, both as an instructor as well as a line officer and chief officer. Also, concurrently with that, I've been involved both as a architect and fire protection engineer. Also worked in the academic side on the college level and also at the National Fire Academy as an instructor. Currently actively involved in supporting research both as an advocate with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Also served on the I-Chief Safety, Health, and Survival section. Had a stint as a vice president with the ISFSI, and currently have had the extreme pleasure and opportunity to work with Niosh on the firefighter line of duty death program, and expanding that a little bit further and doing some research as a tactical theorist.
Outstanding. And our other guest we have with us is another Chris. Hope that doesn't get too confusing during the conversation, but Chris Willis, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell folks where you worked and where you're working and what you're working on.
Well, thanks, Bobby. Chris Willis, and as he said, that I'm a firefighter from up in northern Kentucky. I got my start in about 2002. Currently, I work with Pinwell and Fire Engineering, especially doing the Small Town Tactics and Tools radio show, which we're going to be on the air tonight. I also do a blog for them on the website there, and basically, my area is the small towns and rural areas. That's primarily what I'm dealing with here in Kentucky, and so it's an honor to be on here with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate having you all on. I thought we'd start off this afternoon with just a brief conversation. I had the distinct privilege of attending the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Day weekend this weekend, and I know Bill was also there. Incredibly moving event. We recognized 107 firefighters who lost their lives in the line of duty, both killed in action and active duty deaths. There were 98 for this year, and then another 9 that they added, which brought the total to 107. If I'm correct on that, Bill. If I'm not, please correct me. But extremely moving weekend. There was a tremendous representation by the honor guards from around the country who attended, as well as various pipe groups that helped to support the event. The candlelight event was extremely moving, and of course the Sunday's event was just phenomenal. The way that the foundation puts it together and recognizes those people's sacrifice and provides some measure of comfort for the families, as well as recognizing those people. So much goes into it, just a Herculean effort, and just wanted to say briefly how much I appreciate the work by the foundation and all their sponsors. Motorola Corporation in particular does a wonderful job of helping the event, and very important event. It's very important that we recognize and that we honor and that we pay our respects to those who did pay the ultimate sacrifice in the protection of their communities and our nation. And I think that it was very well done this year. And Chief Dennis Compton did an outstanding job as the MC, and as always, Ron Sarnicki did a Herculean effort, and it was a tremendous honor to be allowed to participate and attend. So, Bill, I don't know if you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
It's always been a great honor to be included with them and to work with the foundation. Just want to highlight that the strong work of everybody involved in there, as volunteers and staff and organizers, giving themselves to put the focus on the families and the surviving members is just quite a tribute to the service of the department and the service that they've given of themselves.
Yeah, pretty phenomenal stuff. And again, if you've never been, you should probably plan on attending at some point in your career. And we do stream it live, and it is archived on the site as well as on the Fire Academy site. So clearly something you should take a view and spend a little time and look at it. So I thought we'd also talk about some current events that are going on. I think we would be remiss. We've got a great group of minds here, active duty as well as retired, that can talk to, but still involved, that can talk to what's going on before we get into kind of the science and flow paths and some other things and some other issues. This whole Ebola thing, flying through Dallas on a regular basis as I do, pretty interesting that now we have our second case of Ebola here in the United States that was germinated here in the United States, another healthcare worker. Interesting to see the reaction of the hospital and some of the stuff that went on with the CDC in terms of preparedness, and the Dallas Fire Rescue Unit that was quarantined, and our fellow firefighters that are still under quarantine now from their initial exposure to Mr. Duncan who was the I think they call him the index patient, if I'm not mistaken. And I was just wondering if guys have heard any other chatter around the country, it's fire departments are preparing, or what they're doing to kind of help our folks in the EMS side, but as well on the fire side, as most fire departments respond to EMTs and paramedics together to prepare for this. And didn't know if Milwaukee was taking any steps, or on the rural aspect, if Chris Willis knew of anything in his organization, if they were at least talking about it. Because today with the air travel and as it is, and as mobile as we are, it's harder and harder to contain these types of outbreaks.
Well, I can chime in. You know, it's getting worse out there. You know, I think a lot of fire departments are getting behind the 8 ball in terms of their own preparedness and their own response to it. I hope our hazmat teams are pulling out the Kyvec level B suits and definitely getting the duct tape out to tape ankles and wrists. So I guess late breaking news. I know Frontier Airlines is looking for 132 people that were recently on a flight from Cleveland to Dallas that were flying with the boyfriend, I guess, of the nurse that recently contracted Ebola from patient 0, if you will. So the CDC is actively looking for them. So if you're one of those 132 people, you are definitely being sought after. So other than that, for my department's own operations, we're sending out information from the CDC every day. We're definitely on it. You know, a lot of the recommendations out there are not wearing shorts during EMS runs. A lot of departments allow their personnel to wear shorts. So my department, most people wear their bunker pants in every EMS run. But for those that work in more temperate or hotter climates, definitely something to think about because they're finding different ways of transmission and of the virus that they didn't think was occurring. So it's out there, folks. Let's be prepared, and let's definitely stay on it.
Yeah, I think from a rural aspect, when you look at it, one thing we often hear out here is that it'll never happen to us because we don't have an international airport as close to us as, say, Milwaukee or Dallas. And so one of the issues that comes up is, well, this stuff will never happen. It'll never filter in down here. And obviously this is just taking a complacent look at things. You know, and I think a lot of times we also look at this stuff as being just an inner city issue because of that. You know, but when you look at the way these things transmit, you know, as simple as being on an airplane coming back from vacation, I mean, you're right there. You know, you don't have to live in a large metropolitan area. And I think what puts a lot of people in rural areas at risk here is, as far as the fire and EMS aspects goes, is they're not as up on the germs, I guess you could say. You know, because as the CDC has explained, this is stuff that's kind of caught them blindsided, so to speak. You know, they're trying to catch up, and you know, and unfortunately, the germs never stop. So they're not going to wait for you to get caught up, and so we don't have time in the rural aspects to try and play catch up. Because once it gets here, that's it. You know, it's just going to be like in Dallas. So. You know, I think we need to look at the education aspects, and I think education for the EMS workers and fire response is going to be huge in these rural areas to keep it contained.
And I think filtering further in on that, when we talk about the complacency factors, take a look at what caught everyone by surprise. I think that's probably the most telling issue that's affecting us nationally. When we have national organizations that really didn't expect the situation to unfold as rapidly as it has. But I think as many of the organizations, certainly the International Association of Fire Chiefs just recently published some data out there in terms of some protocols and some guidance documents. But I think formatively the National Fire Service needs to understand that it can affect every single aspect of our service, both from the rural to the urbanized areas. The fact that we have such a mobility of our civilians population that don't take anything for granted, understand what those immediate protocols may be right now, and then take the appropriate actions proactively until things are proven otherwise.
Yeah, I'd strongly recommend folks, and I don't mean to interrupt Bill, if you have some thoughts, please chime in, but I strongly recommend folks look at those recommended protocols and get the Tyvek suits out and, treat every medical call that you get as, especially someone not feeling well with a high degree of suspicion until proven otherwise. The hopes are that they contain it as quickly as possible, but you think back historically, these once things break out, they break out, and hopefully this doesn't. But history is if history is any lesson, we should be getting prepared for probably at least a minor breakout, if not a significant breakout, potentially.
Well, I think real quick on that, Bobby, is, I just want to talk about how, the fire service, they seen the issue, like Chris Naum was saying, is, they created these the training packets and the training manuals and stuff on this stuff on what we need to do as far as goes. And I think, the biggest step is that we got to take the time and actually look into this stuff just the same as we would, as we're going to be talking later on the UL stuff. It's stuff that's relevant to us, whether or not we want to admit to it or not. And I think when it comes to germs and potential germ warfare or anything like that, we want to turn a blind eye because we feel like it won't happen to us. Similar to what he was saying with, it caught the CDC off guard and spread as fast as it did here potentially. And I think we got to take the steps to better ourselves and not turn that blind eye.
Yeah, well, I think we all agree it's time to get prepared and pay more attention. So let's segue from that, and hopefully we may end up doing a whole hangout just on Ebola if the situation continues to expand. But we got a great opportunity here, I think, to talk about investigations and talk about science and how science is going to impact our investigations of fires going forward. I've been involved in a couple of Niosh studies, and Chris is involved in a couple of Niosh studies. So I think that it'd be great to talk about that right now. I know Erich had a few questions he had for Chris. So and again, if you have questions for any of us, it's hashtag FEtalk, hashtag FEtalk, and we'll be happy to try to answer your questions if we can during this hangout. So Erich, I know you had a couple of questions. Why don't you throw a few at Chris, and we'll start talking about investigations, how science is impacting what we're doing there today, and some of our other thoughts on the fireground.
Yeah, I guess I'll toss it to Chris Naum here. I guess the way to start out the discussion is talk us through a Niosh investigation, your participation in Niosh investigations. I know you have the architectural background and a lot of the building construction subject matter expertise, but kind of take us the viewer through the process. Niosh coming to town and kind of the beginnings of compiling and accumulating the data and metrics and the events that happen at those fires. Because I think a lot of us in the fire service really, I wouldn't say are naive to the construct of one of those reports, but how do we get to these recommendations, or we'll start out by saying, how do we even begin?
Yeah, thanks for the segue on that, Erich. When we talk about the Niosh reports, certainly many of us have become much more familiar with those reports in the last number of years due to their availability online. I can remember back in the late 1990s, 98, 99 timeframe, when you had to actually wait for that document requested, first of all, in writing through the mail, and wait for that document to make its way through the system. But the immediate availability of that information now, and more importantly, the degree of depth that the reports have attained, and the numbers, both positive and negative. You take a look at the fact that we are seeing the more readily available reports coming out. But at the same time, for each one of those reports, we certainly had an unfortunate circumstance, an event that led to a line-of-duty death that resulted in the report being published to begin with. So more is not always better, but the fact that we do have those lessons that are being drawn and those recommendations. Just to clarify a couple of items, I work as a subject matter expert and a technical advisor to Niosh to support the promulgation and the development of those investigations that are done through the Firefighter Line-of-Duty Death Prevention Program, which is part of the CDC. So Niosh has a full-time staff of fire investigators that both come out of the fire service. They've been able to obtain and put on board a number of very prominent fire investigators with numerous years of experience on the fire ground that lends itself extremely well to the investigative process. Along with that, there are a number of engineers and safety experts that all collectively support the efforts. Upon invitation of a local jurisdiction, Niosh is provided that invitation, and that group of investigators arrive at the locale to initiate and support the investigative process. They are there not to overstep any type of bounds within the local level, but are merely there as an investigative group to help identify opportunities and insights that lend themselves back to the local level reporting process, but more importantly to identify and disseminate that information back on the national level through their charter. So it's a cooperative process between the Niosh staff and those investigators with the local jurisdiction that work hand in hand, both at the state level as well as at the local level. Many investigations have state agencies, the state fire marshal's office, that will support and drive those recommendations. But the whole emphasis and goal of the investigative program, as we all know, is to identify any gaps or identify any particular issues that may have led to those unfortunate events, both from an apparent cause, common cause, or root cause standpoint, and give us the lessons learned. That's the bottom line. Is the voice of the firefighters that lost their lives are speaking to us through the writings of those reports and those recommendations. And it's up to us to be able to take that information and apply it to our own jurisdictions and see what can be done to help eliminate or reduce the likelihood of a similar event.
Okay. Now I know you were recently involved with one in Pennsylvania. Can you kind of talk us through I guess your role at that recent line of duty death report? It was a very polarizing report because it resulted in numerous firefighter fatalities. But talk about I believe you're involved, and I apologize if I'm speaking for you. If you were involved in the building construction analysis of that, do you mind just briefly talking about the fire building at that incident, some of the building construction factors that contributed to the collapse, as well as any of the the tactical and operational aspects that could have also contributed to that?
Sure. The particular point or report that you're making mention of occurred on April 9th, 2012, and I just brought up that report here on our other monitor, but the report number, Niosh report number, is F as in Frank 2012-13. This particular event occurred in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It occurred in a vacant building, a building complex which actually involved an entire city block area, vacant, unused for over a decade of time frame. Brick and joist, heavy mill construction, both mill and semi-mill construction. The report delves into the details of the construction more so than any other previous report that Niosh had put out. This became a watermark report due to the leadership that Niosh identified very early on to expand the reporting capability specifically to building construction, since in many instances it has such a prominent element in the line of duty death causal factors. In other words, when we talk about firefighting operations and we have a situation such as this that led to a structural collapse during fireground operations that led to 2 line of duty deaths, the building is first and foremost to many of the contributing and apparent causes. So in this instance, we have a complex of buildings vacant and unused for an extended period of time, but as with any unused structure in an inner city area, there were undefined and unreliable sources indicating that there may be individuals present. So a number of situations arose tactically, as we normally see in terms of operations, that were not sustainable in terms of the fast-spreading fire, and that fire eventually ended up compromising structural components, which we identified extensively in terms of some mechanisms of collapse. So my direct involvement was to identify and sort of capture some of the information that the Niosh investigators started off with, expanding upon information that the fire department was able to expand upon and obtain, and then taking a look at, again, history of repeating events, construction, fire dynamics, tactics, being able to identify some of the precursors that led to that. One of the significant items that I'll make mention of real quickly here was the fact that there were inherent building features, and this is a critical part that ties into everything that we talk about from a fireground operational standpoint. There were inherent building features in this building, complex of buildings, that should not have been a surprise to the firefighting forces, either during their initial arrival or during the subsequent operations, that both a initial collapse would be present, which it did occur, but more importantly, a secondary collapse would be potentially there. And unfortunately, some of the other aspects dealing with collapse zone management, fireground operations, placed some of the personnel in harm's way that led to that secondary collapse, which eventually trapped an entire ladder company in an exposure building and resulted in the extrication of 2 of the individuals of that company and led to the line of duty deaths of the officer and the firefighter. Another important item to make note of for our listeners and viewers is, again, when you do take a look at that report, Niosh invested and allowed a considerable amount of resources in that document and in the report. It was actually almost 100 pages in length, and almost a third of the document focused in on building construction, performance issues, fire dynamics, and the lessons learned not only from a construction standpoint, but understanding it in the context of that particular operation and providing the recommendations that were born out of that report.
You know, I think you raise an important point when we talk about the context of the event, and I think that there's been tremendous progress on behalf of many of the investigations. Besides this investigation, I think the Yarnell report was also a landmark report in that for the first time we started to talk about sense making, and I think we're moving away from the grip that modernism, and in particular ultramodernism, has had on our research up to this point. You know, if you think about it, we've pretty much been following Newton and Descartes for the last 500 years plus, with, you know, cause regnata and you know, the things are either of the mind or of matter, and then reductionism, which is, you know, Sir Isaac Newton's gift to us, which is brilliant, and God bless us. It's been said that we couldn't have gone to the moon if it wasn't for Sir Isaac Newton, and I agree. But I think it's also important to note that we're starting to look more at the complexity of these events and moving away from some of the I think more counterproductive, in my mind, more counterproductive older human factors mindset that we have. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, or if anybody else wants to comment on that. I think the investigations are improving because we're starting to look at local rationality and how people make decisions in context, and not so much that linear A led to B, led to C, led to D, because the scenes and the events and technology and people and all of that's intertwined in these things, so it makes it a very complex problem. And you know, we've kind of grown up in a series of generations now that think that all problems can be tackled and solved in an hour because they are on TV. Well, the real world's a much more complex and messy place. And, so I think it's important that we look at these reports and the fact that the methodology of how we look at human factors is improving, and a lot of the folk science that had been generated around linear thinking and reductionism is starting to be less prominent, I guess. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but it's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I would agree, Bobby. I mean, you take a look at, and I'll just expand on the complexity of these investigations. Can be very extreme, and certainly in the light of a incident within the urbanized setting where there are a lot of variables involved, a lot of issues that cover the entire gamut of operations, from the training side to the preparation side, the dynamics of the fireground at the time. The most important element is the context in which those events occurred, the lessons learned. And the other important element that we as a fire service need to take away from it is to take a look at that report, take a look at those recommendations in the context of our operational parameters. What are we currently operating under? What are the gaps? What are our limitations? What are the capabilities, both the pluses and minuses? And more importantly, in every single incident, there's a takeaway. It's a matter of how extensive that takeaway is in terms of its impact or influence on our organization. It may be minimal at best in its lessons learned, or it may have profound impacts that, again, go back to the core of our operations. We take a look at Charleston as an example. It certainly had a significant impact on one locale, but how did that ripple and affect other locales, whether it be urban, suburban, or certainly the rural setting? I think the lessons learned are embedded. It's up to us to be able to have the effective leaders who are able to identify what those elements are and make a learning opportunity for enhancement and improvements in our operations going forward.
Just feel free to jump in, gentlemen. Act like it's a union meeting and you're getting screwed again. So just shout out if you've got a thought, Bill or Chris. Don't hesitate to jump in.
Well, in that case, no, actually, I guess let's talk about the recommendations on these Niosh reports for a moment. Many times, Niosh often gets accused of having the similar recommendations in every report. Is that because these are the similar faux pas? I don't know. Maybe that's probably the wrong way to describe it, but is that the result of similar actions occurring at myriad fires, different types of fire buildings that collectively we need to work on, address, and perhaps research more in depth. Obviously, the first one's communication. We always see that as the number one. But two oftentimes is accountability. And I guess as a group, let's talk about accountability for a moment. What is the, I guess, with regards to whether urban, rural, suburban, what's the best way to account for personnel on the scene? And I'll kind of throw this out. This is slightly rhetorical, but what is the best way to account for personnel on the fire ground so we can reduce lost, trapped, or missing firefighters and reduce firefighters, suffering building collapse in areas they shouldn't have been in? Heavy question, but I'll let you guys digest it, but I think it's something we should address as a group here.
I know for us, what we typically will do is we'll assign more chief officers, similar to a West Coast fashion, where you've got a chief officer in charge of the Charlie side of the building. So he'll be in charge of who's going in, who's going out, and their personal accountability. But then we'll also have a chief who's in charge of, say, attack, chief who's in charge of the ventilation. So each one can coordinate who's doing what and how are they intermingling within the building. And then the communications issue with us, you know, we'll go and get on a channel and you know, it's usually predetermined, but the communications on our side of things in the rural areas is that's where it's at, and the communications among the chief officers or just the company officers, depending on the time of the day, or even the senior firefighters who are in charge of this incident, that's where it's going to be at, and each one is communicating within themselves to account for who's where and what's going on at what time. You know, and a lot of times they're multitasking it. You know, you may find an engineer who's also giving progress reports on his side of the structure. So instead of having an incident command on the, you know, right at the front door, he may go around at the back side, and the engineer, he can set the truck and then watch conditions from the front. I mean, is it ideal? Well, no, not really, but you got to do what you got to do with your thing that you got.
Yeah, Chris makes a good point when you talk about the level of oversight. But, you know, we all know that the continuing problems may be such that we may not have enough bodies to provide that level of oversight in terms of the ratio. So it all goes back to even a more fundamental item, Eric, and that talks about accountability and tactical discipline. That there has to be a level of discipline that's instilled upon the company that comes from the company officer to maintain the integrity of what their assignment and tasks are relative to the strategical goals. So if we have tactical discipline at the company level, and that expands out in terms of the divisions and the operational arenas that they are given their assignment to, then there can be accountability in terms of who's where and what they're doing. But freelancing erodes that company discretion at times, although it has its place, certainly does lead to adverse conditions because we have companies that are in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong reasons, and we don't have that level of managerial control from our incident management system. So although the ICS system does wonders when we're talking about fireground management, you cannot have an effective manager control what may be happening both in and outside of that structure unless we have the discipline that's instilled upon the companies to maintain that integrity.
Okay, well let's consider standard operating procedures and guidelines for a moment. I've always subscribed to the belief that, you know, regardless of your size of your department and the number of personnel, you should have all of your operations in writing. I know that kind of puts some constraints on the incident commander and companies, but I think it kind of speaks to everything we're talking to with regards to you know, Chris's tactical discipline. But, you know, knowing where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and what you're supposed to be carrying when you get there, I think is a good foundation to any operation. So when the chief officer arrives or successive chief officers arrive, they have an understanding of where people are supposed to be. And then again, when you find somebody's not where they're supposed to be based on their order of arrival, on the response ticket or whatnot, then we can address that and find out exactly why. And I think that's a good start to reduce a lot of the freelancing, and obviously a lot of things come to light when we realize, oh, wait a minute, they're operating on the fire floor with the first driving truck company if you're the second new truck because of this, and then we can obviously adjust tactically and strategically and accordingly. So what are your thoughts about standard operating guidelines, and do you guys think that this is a way to overcome some of our lesser staffed fire departments with regards to freelancing?
Well, I don't think that, and I might be the one dissenting opinion on the panel about it, but I don't see where we have, if we look at our line of duty death reports and investigations, and if we really go into our near-miss reports as best as possible and as best as they're filled out, I don't find freelancing to be a huge cause or contributor to the larger number of deaths that we're experiencing as a fire service as a whole. Aside from that, if we're looking at, actually, I think what you're actually trying to say, or maybe I'm trying to lead your question here, how can we better organize our fire ground so that we manage risk better, especially risk that our own human actions will bring on ourselves? How do we organize our fire ground better? A lot of that, especially with departments that aren't your heavy urban departments, but your suburban and your rural limited staff departments, you have to go back to what core skills can we deliver, and what can we deliver in the shortest amount of time as the first arriving companies, and work from there. A lot of departments that I've seen through work and travel, they'll have great SOPs, and yet they're working with 3 guys on the first engine, 2 guys on the first truck, and the next engine's coming from the town nearby. It might do great to have, okay, the 4th engine's going to do this, and the 2nd truck's going to do this, and the rescue squad's going to do that, but are they actually able to hit the basics of the first arriving company? For some places, that SOP might be, establishing a water supply for the first engine, or helping the first truck get the rest of the bed clear of ladders. Other places, it might be, the 4th due engine reports here, the 2nd due truck goes there. So I think it's more of a matter of what skills do we want to deliver properly when we get on the scene to make the greatest impact in our favor and in the favor of the people who may be inside.
Right, and basically he's talking about something that a lot of rural areas are pretty familiar with, and that you got to you criterize basically your tactical priorities. I mean, you're basically going to establish, if I do this, what's the outcome? If I do that, what's the outcome? And so you're going to have to pick within seconds what you need to do. So if you've got the 3 people or the 4-person engine, you're not going to be able to do everything all at once the way we often read in the magazines, from a lot of larger cities. The other thing that I've seen, and I'm not familiar if, Bill, you've probably seen it too, it sounds like, but you can't take a department's pre-existing, go to, any town USA and adopt what they have, especially in these smaller departments where you don't have the staffing. You really need to build something around what you've got. And one thing that a lot of places have done is they'll take it and adopt just to have it. So they'll go to a department who is more career staffed than volunteer staffed, and they'll adopt what they're using. And it doesn't really even apply to what they've got. It's like tower ladder operations. You can't take a tower ladder operation guideline book and apply it when they don't even have a tower ladder truck for that fact. It looks good when you've got it on paper, but if you don't even have it, and that's far out there, but it happens. It happens a lot.
I'll just chime in for a second. I think there's there's about 24 separate issues we're kind of kicking around in here, and I think Chris started us off when he was talking about, when we look at these reports, what's really powerful about these reports is being able to create plans. It's called scenario planning or event planning for future events, and what Chris and Bill point out very eloquently, better than I ever could, is that we're always constrained by 3 things: our resources that we have, the information that we have, and time pressures. We have to make decisions quickly due to the fact that fire isn't waiting for us to make a decision. It's growing and threatening lives and property. So what's kind of neat, though, is that you take these reports and you can look at them and you can do that scenario planning. I think Eisenhower said it best. He said, it's critical that we do, it's absolutely critical and completely useless that we plan. And he said that, what he meant by that was that we have to plan for events, but then once you get to the event, all bets are off, and as how well your plan's going to hold together. Folks in the military say after the first shot is fired, the plan's busted. But that being said, it does give us a point to start and some idea about what we can do. And my idea on policies and procedures, as Erich brought up, and trying to touch a little bit on what everybody added, I had a brilliant conversation, some really great insight there. But what I think is great about policy and procedures is that they're really guidelines, and that sometimes we deviate and it leads us to tremendous success, and then that person's considered a hero. And other times we deviate and it leads to injury or tragic outcome. And depending on how it goes is how that deviation is then judged, if you will. If someone deviates from a protocol or a SOP and it has a positive outcome, way to go. If someone deviates from a protocol or an SOP and it has a tragic outcome, oh, the world is falling. They deviated from the SOP, and that's why this bad thing happened. Again, that's reductionism. That's Newton and Descartes. That's A leads to B leads to C leads to D, and it ignores, as Chris pointed out earlier in the conversation, the overall context. There's thousands of variables that are impinging upon that decision making, and as Chris Willis said, those decisions will be made in a second with limited information, and we don't know everything. What's interesting when we write these reports is that I think we've learned, in large part, to avoid that hindsight bias. We know the outcome, so we think everything leading up to that outcome was contributory or causal. That's the word that's always thrown out there. Sometimes, there's always people say, oh, if you pull one link out of the chain, that the accident doesn't happen. Well, that ignores the complexity of today's fireground and the intricacy of today's socio-technological society. So neat stuff. I think the reports need to keep being written. I think we need to be looking at the science that's going on, and clearly accountability is in there. But I'd kind of like to throw something out at the group and in general and say, because we're talking about reporting, and not just Niosh reporting. I think after action reports by organizations are just as valuable and maybe more valuable in some instances because they directly connect people in a more vibrant way, if you will, to what's going on. So my question was, do you see some of our current research in human factors and some of our current research in fire behavior, and clearly, Chris, I know you're an absolute wonk and you're totally into the gouge with building construction, and now that we have buildings being built out of intermodal storage containers, for goodness sakes, and everything else under the sun out there, you were just talking about mill construction, which is from 200 years ago, and now we have apartment complexes being built out of what we use as flashover chambers, and everything in between. How do you see the reports being affected by all of that, and are we learning, I guess, is the question that I would have for the group.
I'd say no. I'd say that also the reports aren't affected by that. If you take any span of year of the reports and look at the contributing factors, the majority involve human nature, human causes, problems with communication, organization, and such like that. Now, yeah, there are the building features, the fire behavior features, etc., and so on. But we also have to remember, or at least ask ourselves, when we're talking about reports, are we talking about just fireground operation reports, or are we talking about all the reports as a whole? Because to throw away, or not throw away, but to put aside the ones involving training, vehicle operations, and just medical deaths, while they're not popular, they're still just as valuable. And so are we learning anything from them? Yes and no. Yes, we're learning from them when they're popular, when they're from the larger cities, when they're from involving a fire that turned out to be a glossy cover on the magazine or a good spread on the site and a peak interest in the news stories. Are we learning from them as a report as a whole? No, because I think, and this is just me personally, but I think as far as me and others in the industry, as far as Bobby and Erich and those of us with engineering and Fire Rescue Magazine and Firefighter Nation, we have a responsibility now, because we have different generations of firefighters and readers and how they read differently. We have a responsibility to take that report, take that information that Chris and others helped compile, and then to break it down into almost like a Cliff Notes version, if you will, to the the demographics of our readers. So yeah, there might be the report from Philadelphia that might not totally apply to all our readers. So we have to take what parts from it would and share that out to those, so it makes a greater impact. A medical death that involves training, we have to heighten that, especially if we see deficiencies in the training that could have easily been avoided.
Right, I totally agree with you. I think, the key on that, a lot of times I've found that a lot of guys will not look at these Niosh reports unless it is something that they've seen on the news or on Facebook. That was, the cover story of a, New York City 8-alarm fire or something along those lines. And I think the thing that comes down to with fire rescue and fire engineering and Firefighter Nation is, like you said, a lot of times, especially in volunteer departments, they don't want to have to sit down and decipher these things. Bobby, you can relate being up there at UL with us, and Erich, you was up there as well. When you start talking to fire engineers about heat release rates and their kilowatts per hour and this and that, the average firefighter is not going to understand it. And so as soon as you start to talk over them, you're likely to turn them off to what information is there. And so I do think it is something that we need to address, and it's very challenging, is, who's going to be reading it and how are they going to perceive it? Because everybody's different, and good and bad. It creates a challenge, but it's definitely something that affects us all.
I think those are some really great points. It's interesting. There's the new view of human factors kind of looks at, do we blame the human or do we blame the system? And we're moving away from blaming the human, which is kind of an interesting move. But there's a great question we just got from Dave LeBlanc, and Dave asks, he says, command inadequate risk assessment, firefighter accountability, SCBA air management, inadequate communications, SOPs and SOGs are what are commonly called the Niosh 5, and there's a couple of instructors out there, and Donny Castros in particular does a great presentation on what he calls the Niosh 5. He says, that being said, are they really the causes of these LODDs? It's a great question. I'll throw it out there.
I'll take the first shot at that. I think, well, first of all, those are the attributing causes, and in many aspects, they ultimately are the root causes. We have these repeating events that, as we have all been talking about, have not sunk in with the fire service. We aren't taking those lessons learned and applying them to our own locales or our own context of our organizations. I quickly pulled up a report here. The University of Georgia, 2011, issued a report that was based upon a review of 1,667 recommendations out of the Niosh reports on fireground line of duty deaths. And they came up with 4 root cause factors that dealt with under-resourcing, inadequate preparation or the anticipation of adverse events, incomplete command, and suboptimal personal readiness. And those 4 particular items really hit the heads in some aspects of what we've been talking about. So it's difficult when we try to take a look at, is there something new that's happening out there that we haven't recognized? But in almost every single fireground-related condition, when you take a look at the factors that were involved, they all very narrowly go back to these common causes or these apparent causes that have applicability to other events that we have not completely eradicated or implemented to the standpoint that we've changed the culture or the fire suppression model or the operational profiling. It's a combination of a lot of complexities, but normally they can be broken down to some very specific elements that we keep rereading within those reports. So to a great extent, yes, we aren't learning and we aren't applying those lessons.
But, I just got to jump in really quickly, though, and say, we started off talking about Ebola, and almost every single one of those things you just mentioned, we could throw out at the current problems within the Presbyterian Hospital, whatever, and the CDC debacle to the Ebola deal, too. So it's interesting, how it kind of, if you think about what they're talking about there, they're talking about today's society's issues beyond just the fire service. I'm just throwing that in. I don't mean to interrupt, but please, Bill and Erich, chime in on the Niosh 5, please.
Well, Chris is right as far as that when it comes to the fireground area, but again, because I like writing about it and reading into them, and also the data that's out there, we have currently 67 67 on-duty deaths to date, and of those, I can double check, but I believe of those, 7 or 8 are actually ones where the victim was directly involved either on top of a structure or inside a structure doing firefighting. So, part of me has a real strong heart the fact that if we're going to work toward how to reduce line of duty deaths and reach firefighters and deliver what they need, you know, are we doing a disservice in a sense? Well, maybe not a disservice. I'm sorry, that's not a good word. But are we doing the best that we can with the opportunity that we have when we're looking at a small number? You know, you can get tons of interest on the Niosh reports dealing with building collapse and flashover, and let's even go forward and say, you know, improper operations, maybe stretching a dry line down into a basement of a well-involved brownstone, or you know, going inside a building that's an exposure and no collapse zones established, things like that. Those are all good and cool as far as topics. But when you have, you know, 60 some who have died because of some possible health-related issue or behavioral issue, what are we saying to that, about that low-hanging fruit that we can make the best use of and best impact on?
You know, that's an interesting point. I mean, rarely do we, and it's a hard subject to broach, but health and wellness, physical and mental, obviously, it's just kind of coming into the foray in a lot of things that we're talking about, and definitely that Bob and I will be talking about in our respective magazines. But you know, I agree. I think we focus on the right things operationally, but we really don't take a look at a lot of the root causes. So I think maybe, you know, adding a number 6 is you know, pre-existing condition. You know, when I joined the fire service, I literally, one of my first days in the firehouse, I saw a guy buttering a donut while smoking a cigarette. Well, you know, those days are over, but we see, you know, a lot of those similar behaviors that do contribute to a lot of these line of duty deaths. And as tragic as they are, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by not reaching for that low-hanging fruit and putting a little more emphasis on that. But, you know, I'd like to kind of, you know, bring up a point Bill brought up earlier with regards to freelancing. It kind of piqued my interest. Are we really freelancing, and is freelancing that big a component to many line of duty deaths of that 7 or 8 that Bill was referring to? What percentage of those was a result of freelancing not being where they were supposed to be? Because, you know, on my job, I have 35 people coming in. They're coming in 5 minutes. They all want to do something when they get there, but we have positional responsibilities, areas of responsibility. So when I see somebody out of position, that's when I really start to get in there and find out why. And oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, it opens up a whole new part of the incident that maybe other companies aren't aware of. You know, maybe they're you know, it's an odd configuration of a typical fire building that we respond to, and they're having difficulty finding you know, the means of egress and a way to, you know, search and advance the hose line, and they're just not reporting that. So I think there's a lot of those components as well that we're really overlooking and not really delving into a little more. So apologize for being long-winded, but I definitely think that, you know, freelancing is something we need to take maybe a second look at and redefining what freelancing truly is, and definitely start getting our health in order.
Yeah, the health and wellness portion of it, you know, we're certainly realizing a lot in the last couple of years with issues dealing with cancer identification and preventive elements, the whole issue dealing with wellness, both mental as well as physical issues that are affecting the fire service. I mean, there are so many facets to our jobs that are evolving in such a tremendous way, certainly in the last 10 years and more importantly even in the last 5. So we take a look at our job from the prescriptive standpoint of fireground operations. Are we losing our edge? Is there an increased need for knowledge and skills to be developed? I would say yes, only because of the level of information that's coming forward. We're trying to distill and filter all of that and figure out where that all lands. So going back to one of Bobby's original questions earlier on, where we have such a major inundation of technology and information and data points. These are all data points that have yet to be fully materialized and figuring out where do we connect the dots and where do we go forward. So we've got fireground operations, we have all these issues dealing with an evolving fire service in terms of our recruits and company officers and even our commanding officers that are being drawn out of our rank and file with a whole different perspective of the fireground than many of us have been used to. And then you take into account all the other issues, the physical, mental health, carcinogen issues. It is a complexity that we have to tackle headstrong forward, but we need to break those out into smaller pieces and get the advocacies and individuals who have the passion and the time and energies to get that information distilled and communicated and back out on the forefront. There's a lot out there, and all of it goes back to, I think, what we're all talking about is maintaining safety, integrity, and efficiency in our operations and being able to do the job to the best of our capabilities at the safest, optimum level without diminishing what the mission is. That's part of what we're doing.
Well said. Well, I hate to cut everybody short, but I think we have a little bit of time left for some closing comments and some insight about today's discussion. And I'll throw it out to, I guess we'll start with my good friend Chief Roden. Why don't you give us your closing thoughts, and then we'll go around the room.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to have this panel on again soon in the near future. I think we broached a lot of deep subjects here. Definitely I would like to flush these out a little more. So let's keep that in mind. Also, for those watching, get back into the Niosh reports. Start looking at those. Start juxtaposing your department's operations and what you're seeing there with regards to recommendations, and really start taking an introspective look at yourself, your department, your region, and figure out how we can again grab this low-hanging fruit and perhaps come up with our own contingencies to prevent these line of duty deaths from happening in our own places. Obviously, we're correlating a lot of new research and science into all this, but as we start making sense of it all and and incorporating it into our operations and some of these recommendations, again, let's take that real hard look at everything we're doing in our own jobs, and then we can start that broader discussion on a lot of this stuff. So I'd like to thank everybody for being on today, and again, this is a great chat, and I hope to talk to all of you guys soon in the near future.
Chris Willis, why don't you give us your closing thoughts, buddy?
Well, I just want to say thanks again to you and Chief Roden for having us all on. This was a very good time, and I think the one recurring topic that kept coming up today was basically to keep re-educating yourself. Reread these Niosh reports. Don't just read the ones that are the cover story of fire engineering or fire rescue. Read what comes out. I mean, there's always something in them. Make it a drill night. Make it a tabletop drill. Just sit down and read them as a group. Just self-evaluation, and again, just be careful out there to everybody with the things going on in the world. It's job ain't getting no easier, and we got to take care of one another.
Chris Naum, why don't you give us your closing thoughts, buddy?
I think just to close our threads out, we need to maintain, although we always tend to have such a prescriptive outlook on our operations, clearly we have to maintain a level of adaptability moving forward, especially with many of the challenges. So adaptability, and certainly in the context of fireground operations, needs to be examined further. I would further state this too, that in probably the past 75 or 80 years of our refined tactical practices and operations, those certainly can be assimilated into much of what is emerging in terms of our research and development, and not dismissed. I mean, that's where it's all going to come together in terms of making us more effective and efficient. And don't let, I'll put this out, don't let the tactical entertainment of our jobs take away from the discipline that's necessary to carry out the mission. So it's being adaptable, it's being prescriptive, and it's being disciplined in our approaches on a variety of levels, both from the physical and mental to the fireground standpoint. So great discussion. I look forward to talking with you guys again, and thanks for the opportunity.
Mr. Carey, what do you think, buddy?
It's been a good opportunity. I'd like to come back again and touch on this and more issues on the line of duty deaths. I like what Chris had to say. I like what everybody had to say, especially the idea of don't let the tactical entertainment distract you. We started off about mentioning about Ebola and the fear and the precautions and just the hype and the hysteria, and we have to be careful of that in the fire service. Don't let the fear of doing the job. Now there's a healthy fear, but don't let the hyped fear of doing the job hurt your education. Andy Fredericks is quoted as saying, research, research, research. Read the information, find what's out there that's applicable to you, especially in the line of duty death reports from Niosh and the recommendations that you find at the bottom from Chris and others, and see what have been there matters to you and to your department and can make the most impact, and then engage each other in those conversations. How you fight a fire is going to be different from how I fight a fire. It's going to be different from how the guys 2 counties over are going to fight fires. But we have that. You and Erich and I are working on some new stuff here to engage our readers more, and we've got this big electronic day room, if you will. We want to learn from each other, and we want to take away from that and put it to best uses.
Well said. And I'll also make a quick reference to my old friend Andy Fredericks. In Andy's keynote at FDIC, he made the analogy of the garbage man coming around the corner. Many people have repeated it, unfortunately not often enough have attributed it back to Andy, but Andy said the garbage man, as he comes around the corner, isn't surprised when he sees cans of garbage. He's prepared, as we should be prepared as we see things unfolding around us, whether it be Ebola or fires or EMS calls or even just the changing battlefield, as you will, of our current financing and budgetary problems. It's interesting. I'll leave you with this kind of a paraphrase of an old George Patton line, but fires are fought by apparatus and EMS calls are answered by ambulances and equipment and drugs and hoses and nozzles, but they're won by the men and women who perform those tasks. And it's the spirit and it's the passion and it's the dedication of those men and women who really win the day, who make us succeed. And so, for those of you that are out there listening to this to try to learn more, Andy was right. Research, study, read. Don't just read the Niosh reports. Read other thought leaders' thoughts. We'll be featuring in Fire Rescue Magazine in the upcoming editions some thought leaders' thoughts on different subjects. And everybody will be in there from Ernie Mitchell to Leonard Maldonado, a physicist from Berkeley, because what they think matters. And the world's currently evolving. There's new knowledge out there. The firefighter who's going to win today is the firefighter who is educated, not just trained, but educated. So I'd like to thank all of the folks who joined with me today: Chris Willis, Christopher Naum, my good friend Bill Carey, all my good friends, and my partner Erich Roden. We hope you got something out of this today. Our next Google Hangout will be Monday with Bill Guston. That's Monday the 20th. Special hangout on hose line operations, and Bill's put together his own hand-picked panel. Please join us for that Monday the 20th, a special Google Hangout on hose lines. I'd like to thank our producer, Brandon Rowland, for another great job. We appreciate him feeding us your questions. For all those who joined us today, thank you for your time. We do take your time seriously. We know it's a great gift and a great honor to be able to visit with you here at Fire Engineering and Fire Rescue and Firefighter Nation, and we certainly do appreciate that. Again, please, to echo what everyone else said, be careful out there.